To offer a word of prayer. Father in heaven, I ask you to guide me through this, and I pray that the words I use will be plain and the message will be well received. And I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, the message today is one of conflict of faith. Conflict of faith between the Bible as the inspired Word of God and evolutionary theory. And whether you accept the Bible as it's written or whether you accept evolution as it is presented or somewhere in between, it's an act of faith. Neither one of them are based in science. You can't prove the Bible or disprove the Bible. You can't prove or disprove evolution. You can present evidence for one direction or the other. But you can't, this is not a discourse in presenting or trying to...
Your mic's on the ground there, brother.
Oh, well, that helps.
We're going to want to fix that.
Yeah, probably. And it's still on the ground.
That's right. There we go.
That ought to be better. Okay. Yeah, I probably don't want to walk on that. So at any rate, they're both an act of faith. And we're going to discuss and compare the two faiths, essentially. And now, the evolutionary theory, we believe that the Word of God, that the Bible is the inspired Word of God and is factual and historical as written. Evolutionary theory presents an entirely different thing. And we believe that man was created perfect, and then we had a degradation of the human and everything else around us over the period of time on this earth. Evolutionary theory reverses that and believes that we start off as a nebulous something that turned into something else and so on and so forth. And so it's really a conflict in how we present and how we believe. But again, as I said, we're not designed here to disprove or prove. There is a fair amount of religious organizations and religious groups that subscribe to either evolutionary theory or portions of evolutionary theory. And the Buddhists believe that there's no inherent conflict between the two. And so they accept certain aspects of Darwin's theory. And so it's consistent with some of their core beliefs. Catholicism, the Catholic Church generally accepts evolutionary theory as the scientific explanation for the development of life. However, this comes with the understanding that natural selection is a God-directed mechanism of biological development and that man's soul is the divine creation of God. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the church's highest governing body stated, man is a child of God, formed in his divine image, and endowed with divine attributes. However, several high-ranking officials have suggested that Darwin's theory does not directly conflict with church belief. The Episcopal Church affirmed its belief in the glorious ability of God to create in any manner. The church also expressed skepticism toward the intelligent design movement. Now, when I was doing the research for this, I found that there was a myriad of denominations across the board that accepted evolutionary theory as either consistent with their beliefs or did not actively conflict with their beliefs. Also discovered a number of ministers that did not have any conflict with the evolutionary theory with regards to their Christian beliefs, most notably Billy Graham. And I was a little bit surprised at all that. So at any rate, my bias is that you should be one or the other, you know? You can't stand on both sides of the fence. I'm sorry? I said that's right. So anyway, I found that the more progressive religious organizations, whether Christian or otherwise, had no real problem with accepting evolutionary theory as part of their, either did not conflict with their beliefs or enhance their beliefs. The more conservative or evangelistic denominations generally accepted the Bible as written. But not all. And again, this is not a discourse in comparative religions either, okay? Now, Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 31 and Genesis 2:8. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the hosts of them were finished. And upon this is based our core belief in the inspired Word of God and is as written, not, embellished around the edges. Now Genesis 2:4 puts kind of the finished part on it. This is the history of the heavens and the earth when they were created. End of story, okay? Now, on the other side of that is in the beginning was a Big Bang. And now this is quoting from the Institute of Physics. I'm going to have to turn around here. I can't see my screen. Most physicists believe the universe was born at a Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. That's from the Institute of Physics. And I quote, "Everything in the cosmos we see today was squeezed inside an inconceivably small space, far tinier than a grain of sand or even an atom. Then this unimaginably hot and dense cauldron, for whatever reason, ballooned in at a terrifying rate." And upon that is the whole theory of evolution. And there are some inherent problems with that. Now, the creation core belief, creationists believe that the universe and its contents were created supernaturally by an intelligent being, God. All things in creation was completed by day 6. All things were created perfect. God pronounced them very good. Sin entered the world, and since that time, creation in itself, the created creation, has been on a downward slide. And the further from the fall we go, the weaker and more corrupt things become. Now, the evolutionist core belief. Let me get some glasses on and see if I can see this thing any better. Now, the evolutionist core belief is that over a period of several billion years, life expanded from a single-celled organism into the complex and varied life forms we see today. The plant and animal diversity we see today is a result of natural selection and mutations of the life forms. And some 5 or 6 million years ago, apes and humans split from a common ancestor. So we have two competing and fundamentally faith-based theories on how we all started and why we're here today and what we're doing, okay? Now, the problems with the evolutionary theory, and this is something that they have a real hard problem getting around. We can't scientifically prove that God created the universe. Neither can they scientifically prove that he didn't. And that's why I say it's a faith-based concept. But the problems with the evolutionary theory is this: the law of energy conservation. Energy can neither be created or destroyed, although it may be transformed from one form to another. So the problem they face really is this mass that was in this size of a grain of sand or an atom. Where did that come from? And where did the energy come from to transform it into what we see today? And they say, well, the law of physics didn't apply in those days, but yet they scientifically, they say and state that the God could not have created the heaven and earth in 6 days because it violates the laws of physics. I see a problem here, okay? Now, this is an interesting, because a physicist by the name of Brian Cox was asked at a seminar one time to explain that. And here's his answer. Brian Cox was a physicist, and in the BBC series Universe, was asked where the material came from to create the Big Bang. And to paraphrase his answer, because believe me, you get lost in this. Quantum field theory tells us that even a vacuum corresponding to empty space-time is full of physical activity in the form of energy fluctuations. Now, he went on to elaborate on this, and by the time I finished reading it, I was more confused than I was when I started, because he never answered the question, because they cannot answer the question. It's an impossibility to answer that question. Where did the energy come from? If it can't be created, then how did it get there? I can understand the transforming, but if you cannot create it, how did it get there? And therein lies the crux of their problem. Now, on the other side of that nickel is that we cannot fundamentally understand where the energy came from to create the world through God. We have to accept that on faith, just like they have to accept theirs on faith. Now, Dr. Jason Lisle is an astrophysicist with a string of credentials as long as my arm, but he's a creationist that started off as a Christian, became an evolutionist back to a Christian. And some of the other problems that they face is this. Jupiter gives off more heat than it absorbs from the sun. Now, while Jupiter is a pretty big planet, if you do the math and you go back the 13.8 billion years, there's a fundamental problem. Where does the heat come from in the planet Jupiter? It's impossible. It's consistent with a short-term universe. Another problem is that the Earth has a decaying magnetic field. And it's on a linear pathway, except for during the period of time where it fluctuated wildly around the time of the flood. There was a giant fluctuation in the Earth's magnetic field. But if you go back to 6,000 years ago, which is where we believe all this started, really, we don't know what happened before that, but we know that's about how long the fall and so on. The magnetic field is consistent with a short-term universe. Because if you go back to the beginning of when life began on this planet, based upon evolutionary theory, it would be impossible for life to exist. The magnetic field would be too high. So there's a problem with that theory and that basis for that theory. Now, in order for life to begin as a single-celled organism, again, they can't explain where that came from either, but in order for that to become the life forms, the complex life forms we see on Earth today, it has to be some sort of mutation. Well, it's been estimated that 95% of all mutations are either lethal or damaging. So, and I quote, in order to make changes, mutations have to be passed on to successive generations. It becomes a normal part of the human genome and evolves from a gene variant into a normal gene. And that's from the Cleveland Clinic in their research department. And variations within would be something like blue eyes, blonde hair, skin pigmentation, and those kind of things. Okay, you can change within the human form, but in those types of things, but you can't change into something else. Okay. And again, from the Cleveland Clinic, most genetic mutations are harmful to the host organisms. For example, and here is Marfan syndrome, sickle cell disease, Fragile X syndrome, which is intellectual disabilities such as autism, color blindness, thrombocytopenia, bone marrow doesn't make enough platelets, webbed toes, alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. And when I was in healthcare, alpha-1 was a real problem because it's the #1 cause of COPD emphysema in non-smokers. And it's very difficult to have, and that's because this is a variant, a mutation. And so those are just some of and the list was huge of the amount of mutations that cause harm. Now, if it's a genetic abnormality, and I'm not a geneticist, but essentially what that means is you chose the wrong parents. But if you take things, tobacco, drugs, alcohol, those kind of things that you can create mutations within your own self that you pass on to your kids as well. Now, creationists believe that all mutations are the result of a fallen world, that God created us perfect in His image. And it was only after the fall that you started seeing the mutations. And we have certainly declined in both stature, intellect, lifespan, all of that. So creationists believe that we started on the high part and we're on the low part. Evolution believes started low and ended up on high. We believe that God created everything after its kind. And you can make changes within the kind. For instance, equine, the horses. You can cross a donkey with a mare, and you get a mule. Okay? You can cross different kinds of cats. But they're still cats. You can do those kinds of things, but you can't cross a horse with a cow. It don't work that way. So you can make changes within the kind, but you can't make changes across the kind. And so the more mutations within a kind, the more genetic problems exist. Because, again, they tend to be passed on from father to son, mother to daughter, and vice versa. And the farther, like dogs, the farther away we get from a wolf or a wolf-like animal, the more mutations and more harmful things you start showing up in these dogs. Short legs, okay? Short-legged dog couldn't live in the wild because something would eat it. You have long-haired dogs and short-haired dogs, but if long-haired dogs lived in the tropics, they're going to die. And so vice versa. So these are mutations that, and the farther away from the host animal you get, the more mutations you get. And so like a poodle, for instance, the hair on a poodle never quits growing. So that's a mutation, which means then you got to take it and get the hair cut, and which is why we end up with some of those strange haircuts. All right, now natural selection. Everybody thinks that Darwin came up with the idea of natural selection, when in fact it was before him. A zoologist in 1836 by the name of Edward Blythe advanced the theory of natural selection about 20 years before Darwin. He was a creationist. And his theory stated, the Creator is also compassionate in his dealings. Not only does he make it possible for animals to adapt as means of preserving the various species from observation of their foes, but he has supremely extended himself in love and compassion toward us who are made in his image, his cloak of pure righteousness. Now that was where the first inkling of natural selection that was actually put on paper that I could track down. I'm sure it was before that, but I couldn't find anything. Blythe wrote of an all-wise creator. When Darwin wrote on the origin of the species, he gave no credit to Blythe and took God completely out of the equation. And the reason I mention natural selection is that's how the evolutionary theory presents as, the various species and the various ways that we, like birds on one island have longer beaks than birds on another island and so on and so forth. But they're still birds. Now, a lot of faith is put into radiometric dating. And there's some problems with that. Now, in the magazine, or excuse me, in the publication Science, is where I found this data. Uranium to lead. It's uranium-238 to lead-206, mainly used on old materials such as volcanic rocks. And carbon-14 dating, decays into nitrogen-14. This is the shortest half-life of all the methods, about 5,730 years, which makes it perfect for new or recent materials. Now, carbon-14, you cannot use carbon-14 on anything older than 60,000 years because there is no carbon-14 after 60,000 years, okay? Assuming there was 60,000 years. Now, here's some interesting problems associated with radiometric dating. And we as Christians and creationists we catch a lot of criticism about our belief in a short Earth and a short universe because of the radiometric dating. And there's some real problems with radiometric dating. For instance, rocks from volcanoes with a known age. For instance, Mount St. Helens, which erupted in 1980, have been dated from several 100,000 to several million years old. And so there's an inherent problem with that, in that when you know when the rock is formed, and you know it was formed in 1980, then I don't know where they come up with, but they sent these rocks off to be dated, and that's what they got. Kilauea, I can't pronounce that, in Hawaii, has had rocks from the same eruption dated to many thousands of years to many millions of years. Depending upon, because it erupted into the sea, they sampled it at levels different, and when they sent the rocks in, they put the depth of where the rocks were. And so the radiometric dating was based on where the rocks were. And so going down in time to the bottom of the ocean, it became farther back in time. Diamonds. Now here's an interesting. Diamonds, under the current scientific evolutionary theory, states that, they've been around for billions of years, okay? And yet, carbon-14 have been found in diamonds. And diamonds is almost pure carbon anyway, but they found carbon-14 in that. Now, if diamonds have been dated from 900 million to 3 billion years of age, well, it's an impossibility to find carbon-14 in something that old. So, but diamonds have carbon-14. Now, here's what I find to be absolutely fascinating, is that they have found in fossils. Now, a definition of a fossil generally is that it's a rock. Everything's gone out of the bone or plant material, and it leaves behind a calcified, whatever it used to look like. But they found soft tissue in dinosaur bones. Science News in 2005 published that soft tissue found in T-Rex fossils. Science News again in 2007, substantial remnants of long fiber forming protein collagen found in T-Rex cells. The explanation that Dr. Mary Swatzell is the one from the University of North Carolina, who is a staunch evolutionist, had a bit of a problem here, because soft tissue and cells should not exist in fossils. So her explanation, after kind of trying to figure out how we can explain this, come up with this. Now, she is a molecular paleontologist at North Carolina University, explains that the iron in the animal resistant to decay, made the animal resistant to decay, and this would act much like formaldehyde in that it slows decay but doesn't stop it. Well, if you embalm somebody or whatever, it slows the process down, but it doesn't fossilize the person. It will continue to decay over time. So her explanation presents a problem, okay? And the bigger problem is that iron that she was using to justify the soft tissue They tried that in a lab experiment, and it destroyed the soft tissue, but left behind such things as blood vessels. So the problem that they come up with, or the answer they come up with, was a problem in themselves. Now in Nature, 2015, numerous low-density structures suggestive of soft tissue found. These were flexible, could be stretched, and manipulated. Now, bear in mind that these things are supposed to be several million years old. National Geographic. Fossils are not the remains of the organism itself, they are rocks. Preserved remains fossils if they have reached the age of about 10,000 years. American Geoscience Institute. After a plant or animal dies, it decomposes. Decay slows down only when the organic matter is buried in very fine mud. Now to summarize. I believe in the Bible as written. I believe that it is historically accurate. Archaeologic digs have verified things that critics have long said never happened, but have been proved. But we're not trying to prove the Bible. You can't prove that. You have to accept it. Because it doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on, you have to accept your faith because you can't prove either one of them. And I choose to believe in a God that created this entire mess. And I'm sure pretty much y'all do too, or you wouldn't be here in the first place. Listen to me pontificate, okay? So the people have to choose between the two. And the ones that ride the fence, that can't make up their mind what camp they're in, sooner or later they're going to have to make that decision. Now, in summary, Psalms 19:1. The heavens proclaim the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Dr. Werner Gitt, a German engineer and head of the Department of Information Technology at the German Federal Institute of Physics and Technology, he's retired now, but states. And he developed several informational theories. And Theorem 28, there is no known law of nature, no known process, no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate of itself in matter. And his Theorem 13, when it progresses along the chain of transmission, is traced backwards. Every piece of information leads to a mental source, the mind of the sender. Now, we believe that the mind of the sender in our creation was God. We were created in his image. And so I believe that theorem in that if you trace that thing back to the creation, you're going to discover the mind of God in presenting this. All right, now I've got some pictures for you. This right here are the taken from the T-Rex fossils. And these are bone cells. I suppose you could call them osteocytes, but they should not exist. They should not exist. Now here is an interesting fossil. Now, bear in mind that that theory presents that fossils develop over time, millions of years to billions of years. You see what's sticking out of that fish's mouth? That's another fish. This thing was fossilized in the process of eating his lunch, which is consistent with a flood that caused everything to be buried up. This world was in chaos for that period of time. But nevertheless, that presents a little bit of a problem. Now here is one. If you notice that this fish is giving birth, well, that would be a pretty long labor if that lasted for millions of years. I don't think that fish would be happy. Okay? Now, here's a picture of a canyon, right? See the guy down there at the bottom? You see how all that is nicely layered? That ain't the Grand Canyon. That's Mount St. Helens. And when the eruption of Mount St. Helens, it layered out. And there was a big log jam, Spirit Lake, that log jam broke. This canyon, about 140 feet deep. And it took 2 hours to cut it. Okay? 2 hours. And if you look at it, it looks identical to the layered out in the Grand Canyon. Now here is a beautiful aerial picture, and it ain't the Grand Canyon either. That is downriver from Mount St. Helens. That took days to create. It's scored down to bedrock. So I've always had a problem, even before I became a Christian. I always had a problem with a couple of things. One was a Big Bang. I never believed that at all. And I always had a problem with the Grand Canyon. And if you've ever been to Florida, or not Florida, if you've ever been to Mississippi, Louisiana, you know that Louisiana gets bigger every year because of the delta. All the silt washes downriver and it keeps forming the delta, and it gives out farther every year. Egypt's the same thing. Grand Canyon don't have a delta. I always wondered where the dirt went because it doesn't exist. If that thing happened over time, like they say, then there would be a delta someplace with dirt, and there is none. So overall, they have a problem. I choose, ladies and gentlemen, to accept the Bible as the Word of God. It's been a long journey for me to get here. And I'm pretty sure my son is here today, and he'll walk around and make sure the steeple didn't fall off. But 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been up in this church at all. I wouldn't have even been in this church 20 years ago. But, and I had to get some things straight in my mind before I would become baptized, because I believe firmly that if one part of the Bible is wrong, it's all wrong. And if it's wrong on the first word out of the Bible, then you can't believe anything is written there. So on a matter of faith, I accepted the Bible as written, but I looked things up not to verify the Bible, but just because I have a curious mind. I want to know what's going on out there in the world and the universe. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the privilege of being worshiping here today in this church and on this Sabbath day that you've created. I ask you your blessings and your protection on us as we leave and go to our various homes. And in Jesus' name I pray this. Amen.